Hey, it's Drybear. A lot of people have been asking me about weapon sets and also the weapon passive points in the passive skill tree, and I just need to be making this video at this point. So today we're going to talk about the weapon sets, benefits of weapon sets, the different ways you can swap them in and out, and also the passive skill tree, what the weapon set passive points do and how to employ them effectively. Also a reminder that there are new drops on Twitch right now, so if you go to my Twitch, twitch.tv/Drybear, you'll be get the Temporal Lords portal. So if you don't have any portal skins, you can pick this one up just for watching the stream for free. And the Chimera Pet promotion is still going on until the 22nd. You have to gift 2 subs or sub yourself and gift a sub to get the Chimera Pet, and you'll have this forever as long as you engage with the promotion before it ends. And honestly, I think this is a good enough topic for a video on its own because there is so much that you can actually do with the weapon set system in Path of Exile 2 that is right now not really being fully explored by most players. And I actually still get tons of questions on this, so let's try and answer as many of them as I can. I'm not going to be able to cover everything that you can do with the weapon set system, but I'd like to cover at least the core mechanics and how it functions and what you can do with it, just to make sure that you're understanding the core functionality. One of the biggest things that I got on my my mercenary review video is I was talking about how you can go to play a mercenary and you can actually equip 2 different crossbows, right? Like you can have a crossbow and a crossbow, and then you can load different ammo into each crossbow. And people hadn't really thought to do this, or they didn't realize you could, that you can actually have 2 different crossbows and you can swap between them and then load different ammunition into each crossbow and reload them separately. They actually maintain whatever ammunition. Like if you load permafrost rounds into one and then you load high velocity rounds into another, it will maintain its current magazine amount and have a separate reload as well. And if you do weapon swap suite, you can swap between them and have 2 different complete stats on that. But that functionality extends to all classes, all builds, all skills, everything in the game. So put very simply, you could run with a like a monk, for example. You could have a quarterstaff that does lightning damage, and you could have a quarterstaff that does ice damage, and then you could swap between them depending on what skill you're using. Same thing for sorceress. You could have a wand that does fire damage and a staff that does lightning damage, and you can swap between them, between those 2 that the skills that you have here. So if you go to your skill screen, you can actually force abilities to use one or the other. And if you're on PC, if you didn't know, you can press X to swap between the weapons naturally. However, if there is a weapon that requires a specific weapon, it will do it on its own. You don't have to actually do it. You don't have to force it to do it for you. So for example, I have the crossbow shot on my left click, and then I have rolling slam on my Q. So if I have the mace out and I crossbow shot, it'll automatically switch to the crossbow. If I have the crossbow out and I rolling slam, it'll automatically switch to the mace. That's because the crossbow can't use rolling slam and the mace cannot use crossbow shot. So naturally, without you having to do anything, it will swap between these perfectly. And this is great because it means that you can put different abilities into your build, and as long as you have the weapon required in one of your sets, it'll swap to it naturally without you having to set it up properly. And I think that's when people will, once they are done with their very first build, they're going to start figuring out how to include the extra skills from different setups here, right? If you're running with a lightning build on a sorceress, you can have things like voltaic mark, or you can do extra lightning skills from possibly the bow or the quarterstaff and put that together. You can do an occult build that has curses or chaos damage or minions, and you wanted to build that there. I recently posted a video of a totem build that uses shockwave totem and ancestral warrior totem, but you can also add in the ballistas from the crossbow, which are also considered totems, so you can start adding in more and more of these things that matter from other skills. And this is great because as we start getting more classes, right, when the druid comes out, when the templar comes out, when the shadow comes out, when the huntress comes out, when the duelist comes out, the marauder comes out, all of those are going to add a bunch more skills and weapons and options that you can combine together with your current build. And even when they add the missing skills from the existing weapons, those will then become viable options to swap between on your current character. And realistically, you can actually combine anything you want. There's only 2 main restrictions on using skills, and that is you need to be able to meet the minimum requirements for the ability, which is the level and the main stat. This is where the skill tree becomes interesting, right? Because they're kind of set up as individual stat elements and hybrids, right? So warrior and marauder are pure strength, and then to your right are templar and druid, and they are strength int hybrid. Then you have your mercenary, which is strength dexterity hybrid. Then you have your primary dex, which is ranger and huntress, and then next to that is the shadow and the monk, which is intelligence dex hybrid. And then you have your pure int classes with the winch and the sorceress. Now, generally going to the left or the right in almost all cases is very easy. It's a difference of one single stat. So if you wanted to be a druid that picks up more int and you want to summon wolves, that's very easy because you're very close to a lot of the int style nodes on the tree. But generally going across the tree is a little bit harder. So if you wanted to do like a ranger that focuses entirely on like druid or Templar magic, because you're going to get a lot of dexterity here when you start, getting a lot more strength and intelligence freely is going to require some planning and some gear and some other build up through the talent tree as well. But that's kind of how things are set up here. And I think you should be encouraged to explore those combinations through the weapon set system that allow you to not only give you more variety, but also give you more strength as well. And this becomes increasingly more important as you push endgame as well, and especially as you start building up sockets or even go for the third socket through the Vol system, or you do elemental builds, or even just builds that rely on a specific kind of damage. You may even need a single skill, maybe has a very, on average, low accuracy rating. So you might want to use a second weapon that has a bunch of accuracy on it, because the rest of your build, the rest of your setup doesn't need the accuracy, but just that one skill does, which means you can put a secondary weapon in your offhand that has high accuracy and then force the ability to use that. Again, the way you do that is you go to the ability here and then down at the bottom, if it can be forced, you'll see this down here at the bottom, you can actually uncheck one of the weapon sets. So if I wanted Rolling Slam to only ever use my second weapon, then you can check that and uncheck the other, and it'll force it to use that. So if you wanted, if both abilities can both use the same, so I can put like a mace in each hand, right? I can say that I want Leap Slam to be 1 and I want Bone Shatter to be 2. And so when I Leap Slam, it's going to swap and then go. And then when I Bone Shatter, it's going to swap and then go. It will always use the weapon you tell it to so that it can actually have that functionality. And that gives you a lot of options for damage as well. Especially, like I said, when you start putting in like soul cores and runes and things like that are very specialized in one way or another. Another thing as well is that you actually can play around with the damage output too, right? You may find that some abilities that you want to use are better fit for a two-hander versus a one-hander, dual wield versus a shield, right? Maybe like in the case of warrior, maybe you want to have a shield on when you're doing the rolling slam, which is generally a very slow and dangerous ability, but maybe when you do leap slam, because you're up in the air, maybe you want to have a two-hander in hand, and you can do that with this, which leads us perfectly into the next part of this, which is going to be the weapon set, the skill bonus up here in the top right corner. This is something that confuses a lot of players when they're first starting PoE, because they see that they have no skill points remaining, but then they look up in the top corner like, wait a minute, I have 8 weapon set points, why can't I use this? And so a lot of new players will come in and they'll set this and be like, wait a minute, I can't allocate these points. Like, why do I can't apply any more skill points? Why do I have these weapon set skill points? So the way weapon set skill points work, which is actually very, very cool, and is just like the weapon set itself, which allows you to dynamically change your setup to better suit the skill you're using it on. It's exactly the same. So let me clear this up for you. If you see in the top right corner, it says skill points. That is the total amount of skill points you have. You can only allocate the total amount of skill points you have. If you have a 0, and I say again, if you have a 0 under skill points, you won't be able to allocate any more. That is a global value right here. It will not change until you add more skill points by leveling up or getting the special unlocks for more skill points. The weapon sets are not additional skill points. They are just how many could vary between the two builds if you decided to use that system. So you need to have total skill points available in order to actually allocate the weapon skill points. So I want to make that clear, because I know a lot of people get stuck on that fact. They're wondering, like, why can't I distribute this? Why can't I use this? I feel like I have these extra points here. Are they free? Are they not? How do they work? So what you have to do is you have to have available skill points to spend, and before you spend them, you can choose to either spend them globally without one of these active and allocate your points that way, or you can choose to have them vary based on the weapon that's currently equipped. A great example is right here on the warrior tree. If you stop from this node, up top is one-handed weapons, and down below is two-handed weapons. There's tons of these everywhere. Here's another great one. You have elemental damage that goes to lightning. lightning, or goes to fire, or goes to ice. There's a bunch of these like down over here as well. You can get a whole bunch of them that do different elements. You can even get like in the ranger tree, there's some that do like freeze buildup over here to penetrating cold or penetrating lightning. There's a whole bunch of these all over the place that generally have different options. And it's not just limited to having like dichotomies of like one-handed versus two-handed, or maybe some area of the tree that you only go to. And you can start unlocking more of these weapon sets. The Witch Hunter Ascendancy for the Mercenary can also add even more of these, so their builds can differ. So you'll notice that I have 20 skill points right now to spend, and I have 8, at least on this character. It's a new character I made recently, last night. You can have a certain amount of weapon sets differ. So the way you set this up is you need to have enough skill points available unspent. You see I have 20 unspent right now because I just respec again. So you'll have these 20 here. Then in the weapon set, it'll have the amount of weapon set you have total, and then in parentheses, how many of your global skill points that you have available to actually distribute through the tree. So the way you use this is when you have skill points available, you'll go up and choose a weapon set. So you can choose weapon set 1. So now it says allocating points for weapon set 1 at the top of the screen. So now if I actually were to spend my points, say I can spend it in the one-handed tree, I can get all these one-handed nodes, right? This is for one-handed weapons. And then if I uncheck it, you see it did spend 6 points overall, but it also spent 6 points in weapon set 1. So now, as long as I have weapon set 1 equipped, these will show up. So I can hit apply, and I can switch to weapon set 1, and you can see it lights up. I'm pressing X on PC, swapping between the weapons, and I can press X again, and you'll notice that they disappear, right? Like they don't work. What we can also do is we can go to weapon set 2, and now we're allocating points for weapon set 2, and you can see I have 8 points here, 14 total. This went back up because now we're spending points that weren't allocated in weapon set 1. So now we can go down here, and you notice that these are green instead of red. So I can then apply these, and this is for weapon set 2, and I can swap between my weapons. So if I go here and I have like weapon set 1, say, I can put this here so we have 2 different weapons. So now that we have weapon set 1 and weapon set 2, we can swap between those. You can see that when I have weapon set 2 active, these are active and these are inactive. And when I go to weapon set 1, these are active and these are inactive. It's still the same amount of points, but they're distributed differently. And again, if you remember, because we can actually force abilities to be one or the other, you could run a build where you always two-hand with a certain weapon or always one-hand with a certain ability and lock those in. You can even do things where you set up and you have more defenses with a specific weapon. Maybe you want more attack speed with that weapon to put it together, make that weapon better. Maybe you have an ailment that you want to have a higher chance to apply an ailment on, and so you run with more ailment chances. Maybe you have like a setup for you want lightning damage for one ability that's lightning, and then you want cold damage for another ability that's cold. Maybe you want to have like when you actually have your weapons out. The other thing I'll also mention is that if you have a minion build, some things like in general, you won't get these stats or you won't get the ability from the weapon that's inactive. And this is kind of like a big bummer for minions, is that sometimes the minions will disappear if you remove that weapon and the abilities are gone. So this is mostly for like the instant or like in place abilities that you can swap between them, but it gives you a ton of options for being able to build up on those. Now, one of the restrictions for the weapon set system is you cannot weapon set through the keystones, unfortunately. So if I have this like distributing for weapon set, you can see that I can't apply this. If I remove it, I will be able to apply the keystone. So this one in this case won't allow you to do keystones through the weapon set system. You either need to have it or not in your core build. The other restriction is that you can't actually do multiples on jewel sockets either. I actually really hope that they change this in the future. It's going to be kind of hard to do this through weapon sets anyways, because you obviously, since these are on the attribute highway and they're not off the path, it's a little bit harder to do this. But if you actually were to like set up a weapon set and then try to change the jewel, it won't actually change the jewel. And even if you were to remove that and then put the jewel away and then like reset it, you actually can't even set a jewel socket as a weapon set point either. You also can't leave unbroken or faulty paths either. So what I mean by that is, if you can see here, which is kind of hard to see, you have yellow up to this point. So we have spent our primary passive points to this point in the tree, and then I've spent weapon set 1 on this side here, right? So I have my main tree, which is my perma tree, has gone here to this node, but my secondary, like my weapon set 1, goes here. So what you can't do is you can't have progress being made and then make new progress on the other side to form a new path from a partial weapon set path, because that would break the system, right? So if I did like weapon set 1 only to this node, and then I tried to do weapon set 2 only to this node, it's not going to let me, because if I was on weapon set 2, this segment wouldn't exist, which means that I wouldn't have a path to this node at all. You'll notice that even if I have weapon set 1 to this node, I can't, when I have none of these applied, make this node as part of the global tree, because again, there's a partial link here that if I don't have my first weapon equipped, this path doesn't exist, which means I can't continue the path that way. So you need to have a core of the passive skill tree progressing through it, and then you can deviate from that with the weapon set system, but you can't like cheat the system by having multiple paths that add to each other and give you free points that didn't exist prior. And another note around like stat requirements or changes in values like HP or mana, it's going to rely on the weapon that you have. You will be able to maintain holding on, like equipping the weapon if you don't have the stats, but for example, you'll see that I have this mace here, which I need 61 strength in order to equip, and we already have one equipped here. Obviously, if I try, it's not going to let me do that. So if you were to put a stat requirement, this is another cool part of the system. So say I need 4 more strength over here in order to equip that item. If I go to weapon set 1, for example, and I grab some more strength to fill that requirement, now when I have this weapon equipped, I will meet the stat requirement, which will allow me to equip this item. But if I were to swap to the other weapon, you'll see that I no longer have the stat requirement needed for this, right? So if I swap over, it's now red. I won't be able to equip this in this slot because I don't meet that requirement, which could be a great way to deal with some stat requirements, right? So like if you're trying to, say you're trying to do like a quarterstaff and maybe like I don't know, a scepter or something, or you're trying to use a flail or something that requires different stats. One way to solve that problem when you're multi-classing is to say that you can just make sure you get enough of all of the stats required in order to wear both weapons. But a simpler solution to that is just to weapon set over to the stats that you need for that, and then weapon set over to a different stat area as well. So maybe you weapon set 1 to grab the strength here, or maybe you like weapon set 2 to pick up some like dexterity, or maybe you weapon set 2 to get some extra stats like intelligence or dexterity somewhere else, right? If you're able to move over to grab stats that you need with the weapon set, and then force the weapon that requires those stats to be in that slot when you swap over to the weapon set, you can actually end up saving yourself some points, because when you're using the part of the build that doesn't need that stat requirement, so say like where you have like a quarterstaff part of our build and the mace part of our build, the mace is going to require strength, the quarterstaff is going to require dexterity and intelligence, and maybe we find ways to grab intelligence or dexterity with different nodes, and we just weapon set over to those for the weapon, and that means that you can actually free up those points for the weapon that doesn't need those stats to be spent elsewhere, so you can start becoming more and more efficient with that build. Well, that's probably good enough. The video is getting pretty long as it is right now. I just wanted to show off the ability to swap between different points on your talent tree, clear up the confusion that this is not free points, it is just allocating the same points differently, and also the fact that you can set up weapon sets for abilities and things like that to kind of improve the system or make things better. Like maybe you have your whole build is relying on one weapon, but then maybe you want to use a two-hander for one ability to make sure it hits as hard as possible, or you know that you're going to be doing it when the target is heavy stunned, so you have extra time, or maybe you want to have a shield in your offhand when you're using something. You can actually play around with that weapon set quite easily, as long as you know how the weapon set system works. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.